you all here today. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's a Friday. It's a Friday after a tumultuous week here in IDT, and we're about almost 1/4 way through our vital offerings. Next week we have 3 different sessions. International students are doing a meet and greet, which is a nationwide meet and greet that they'll be zooming in from all over their different campuses in Ireland, and basically having a kind of relaxed but also maybe informative discussion about their experiences here as international students in their own languages, and also it's just really important so we can get people kind of reaching out to each other across the divides of institutions. So that was the brainchild of our student ambassador student associate, to the National Forum for Teaching and Learning, Mr. Pierce McKernan. So well done to him and to the associates for bringing that. And we decided to be the campus that launched it. And we're going to have hopefully a lot coming in. That's on Monday. And then on Wednesday we've got a really interesting, it is a PhD intervention for one of our own, almost doctor, or well, I suppose that's a doctoral candidate of Fiona Flood, who is finishing off her work in Lancaster University. She's in the final throes of this project, and she had a preamble for us on Wednesday, and then she's bringing in her supervisor from Lancaster University, Natasha Lovakic, who is very well known and really interesting kind of work that she's doing, particularly people that are in the arts and looking at image, and kind of a really nice breakdown of how to help students dissect images in a different way. That's very much almost like Bloom's taxology, but it's very good. So if you can make that, that's great. That's a little bit longer. It's 1 to half 2. So that one, I apologize, but she just needs that hour and a half. So we'll be here, and if you can come from 1 to 10 to 2 or something, grand. It's perfectly fine. So you're welcome to come later and leave earlier, whatever suits your space. And then on Friday, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've had boards all over campus with people who have put in answers to the question, what makes a great educator and what makes a great learner? And if you haven't had a chance to put your thoughts down, please do. I'm also going to be sending out an all-staff thing to invite anybody who wants to put it into a non-public forum, their thoughts on those 2 questions. And then the themes that have come out of that, and the shape of how we value teaching and learning here, and the experiences students are having, experiences lecturers are having in terms of this, will be revealed on the Friday. And so please try to make that 1 to 2 here in the library. And the library's been really generous, and I'd like to thank Fiona and the entire staff for giving us this space to work in over the week and the weeks coming. And then we have, I think it's 3 more events after that on the 23rd and the 25th. But I'll tell you more about that when you come to something next week. You see how I did that? So that's kind of, yeah, okay. And you all have in your inbox someplace the actual schedule for the entirety of the program. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. We'll try not to keep you too late today, but I'm really excited about this particular project because it's a scattering of the work that some of the amazing staff that you have here as lecturers and our support staff, that our educational support, that has really made a huge influence on things that are moving forward in IDT and what's going to come and what's actually already available. So our first speakers today are the amazing Fiona Snow, who Fiona Snow, who is teaches. She's one of our lecturers across design in lots of different guises. She's an incredible maker herself, as I know for a fact, because she does. I mean, she's just an amazing person in lots of ways. And then Fiona, who I don't know as well, but I do know.
How do I follow
She's
that?
also amazing.
So she's a different kind of maker. No, seriously.
There's 2 different types of Fionas.
Yes, this is the Fiona team, basically. The Fiona works here in the library. I don't know her official position, but it's something.
Deputy librarian.
Deputy librarian. And she's been so supportive all the way along the 5 years you've been here? 6?
In IGT?
Yeah.
A bit longer.
Okay.
Longer.
Much longer. Is it really? I feel like you've only been here. She just looks so
I took a career break
fresh-faced.
for a little while, but I
Yeah.
won't tell you when I started.
Okay, great. But
I don't know either.
you've obviously still hanging in there because you don't have any lines or wrinkles, so good for you. So they're going to be talking about the materials library, which is one of the LEP projects, and LEP is local enhancement projects. I should have led with that are funded by the National Forum every year, and it's a very exciting time because it's nice to have funding, and that's going to hopefully continue into the future. So thank you all for joining us, and without further ado, let's welcome the Fionas.
Thank you. Okay, so as Rebecca said, this project was a collaboration between myself and Fiona, and it was very important from the outset that it was a collaborative project. It was sort of a project that we've been trying to do in various guises over, I would say, easily 5 or 6 years. And I suppose I was first involved in trying to make it happen within the context of the digital fabrication room, and can we have a resource where students can come and get hands-on with things. And they can come in, they can look and say, okay, I want to work with aluminium composites, or I want to work with woods, or I want to work with foams, or whatever it may be, or not even if they have something specific, but they want to say, what would work for my project? How can I touch a material, experience a material, reference a material, and then allow that to inform my work? And so when the opportunity for a LEP came up, it became a really fantastic opportunity to take it out of the context of an isolated thing that was only accessible to certain students on certain programs in certain contexts, and think much more broadly about it in terms of how could this be a resource for IEDT students, staff, and other people in our communities, and how can we have it something that has the attention that it deserves. An awful lot of our students learn their craft and their time in IEDT through their encounterings with materials, so how could we make something that would work? So it became obvious that this was an opportunity to collaborate with the library, to integrate a materials library into the library's own database, and to stretch, I think, conceptions really of what libraries are and who they're for, and how we can include more people in that and how they use it. So that's a little, very briefly on the why. Fiona was going to take this one.
And just very briefly, I suppose, and Fiona's kind of alluded to it, what is a materials library? So materials library is a collection organised by material type, catalogued to provide information about an item's manufacture, composition, properties, and industry applications. Each entry includes sample images, so I'll show you later on in the presentation an example of a catalogue record. So it includes an image of the item to be the material, the manufacturer's information, and a list of material attributes. So again, that would be important for students if they're researching it. And the collection of materials is in physical format. So we see it here. The whole idea is that the students would come and physically see the resources. So if they were looking for ideas, or if they've been, learning about things, so they can physically see them and touch them. So it's a physical collection of items, and that can be viewed and examined by students, but also that it's searchable within the general library catalogue. So again, I suppose that was the part where the library plays in, that it's the materials library will become part of the main collection, but searchable electronically. So that's okay. And who do we work with? We work with 2 students, an IEDT student here in IEDT, Roberta Dorley, and she's a 4th year 3D design, model making and digital art student, and we had a student on the UCD Masters in Library Information Studies, so across UCD and IEDT, and I think they worked very well together, and they learned a lot from each other, so from that point of view it was very successful.
Yeah, so it took sort of the format. Oh, could you press one more time?
Yeah.
It took the format of basically, in essence, a 6-week research project that Fiona and I oversaw and guided, but that Roberta and Mary did a lot of the work on. So, doing things like precedent searches, kind of what is out there already, what needs to be done, what sort of formats could we take on a materials library, because the tricky part here was not, here's a box of materials, let your students come and rummage. It was it being an actual searchable, controlled database. So what we wanted to prove in this little tiny version at the beginning of the project was, how do we model this? How do we pilot this well? What are the difficult parts? What are the sticky parts? What are the easy parts? How do we even define materials and all that sort of stuff? So one of the first things that Roberta undertook was a precedent search, and we can see there's all sorts of models for this, both commercial, private, and academic materials library across the world. But there isn't one that is public, sort of accessible to an entire community in Ireland. Some schools of architecture may have material catalogues and this sort of thing, but there isn't one where you can go to a general student or academic library and look at materials in an open way. So just the next slide there. So we also reached out to the student and staff body, and we did a survey on, what would you like to see included in a library? And if you go on to the next one, this actually gave us some quite interesting things. So the very first thing the survey told us quite quickly was the conception of the word library is quite limited. So a lot of people were saying, well, I would like it to have pieces of paper for me to take. I want it to have Posca pens. I want it to have materials I can use. So this idea of a library being a sort of a transactional place where you go in, you get a resource, and you take it. So one of the first challenges that I think Materials Library is going to have as we establish it is setting up an understanding that this is a reference library. This is a thing where you can come and experience something, but you don't take it. It's not a transactional library. You can take knowledge with you. You can take some ideas and the rest of it. But the survey was quite interesting in terms of revealing the types of things that students want and expect from a library. And the sort of concurrent with that is the idea that these are actually student needs. Is there a student need for paper? And if so, what can we do about it? So I think that the project has surfaced a number of really quite interesting themes. But it also sort of looked at how could we identify what would be a reasonable number of materials to sort of do our first things with. So you can just keep going through these if you want.
Okay.
In terms of the recommendations, we've looked at how do we express, if we have a digital archive as well as a physical archive, how do we express materiality? Are there things that can be done? If you go back to the last one, actually, Fiona, Roberta went through sort of thinking about how do we express rigidity? So all images, you could have a little GIF and you could have things expressing either their rigidity or their how supple they are, if it can be cut, if it can be scored. There's an awful lot of information that once you think about how do you catalogue it, what then do you do with it? So, and then obviously how do you store and display it? And we've got through eventually to sort of the end, sort of saying that, listen, we're going to take a very small range of materials and we're going to sample them. So Roberta selected from a massive number of categories she established. We selected a very small number of materials, and then between herself, Mary, Fiona, and myself, we thought about how do we make this work now, sort of from a searchable, cataloguing, and database point of view.
Okay, there we go. Okay, well, I think it might. Yeah, I'll just move on to this one. I suppose that was the tricky bit for Mary was she had to work within the library system that we have, the library management system that we have. It's an open source software, so she'd never used it before, and a part of her learning on this project was I kind of set her up as a login, and she had to find out a way of how she would then create this materials library within the library system. So that was I suppose quite a challenge for her because she couldn't do any, I suppose she can't tailor it exactly as she would like it, and again there's a lot of limitations with this software because it's designed for print material. It's not for and they end with this the cataloguing of three-dimensional material. That's not so this library system is not set up for this classification, and the cataloguing is not set up for this. Again, she's to work within certain cataloguing rules, certain classification rules. So this was all her learning experience for this part. And she did find it quite tricky, certainly what we use here is not set up for a materials library. So I suppose going forward, and one of the recommendations would probably be, certainly for this library management system, materials library, yes, we can have it within it, but it's not really ideal. I think it came up across some challenges with the GIFs not working, so it's quite limited. But she learned a lot about the system, again, I think going forward from talking to her anecdotally. And again, we have library management systems, but we don't always keep them. So, what we have set up on this one might work, but then do we have something that would slot into another library management system easily? So that would be something to think about. This is an example of one of the catalogue records, and you'll see she, this was the item that she was trying to catalogue, and ideally then that she'd have this gift with the moving image. But again, so just to search for that, she set it up quite well. It would need a lot more detail, really. Again, it's about time. You're inputting all these things manually, so you're not, for catalogue records that we do for books now, you can download records, you can purchase them, but you'd be doing this from scratch and putting in details of composition and everything, so there'd be quite a lot of work in it. But I could search that just very simply under materials library, so you don't have to go through loads and loads of book records. You can just select that you want to just to search the materials library. So that's kind of, and you can link it outside, and you can link it to, there's lots you can do with catalogue records, but it's about time and expertise.
You can reference it then as well.
Yes.
In your research,
Yes.
which is completely novel. Something
Yeah.
you could do with the material.
So again, some recommendations that Mary had. I suppose there's limitations with the Dewey Decimal Classification Scheme. It's not set up for organising materials library. We had some issues with the moving image, which would be lovely, a nice little, especially if you're, again, for remote learning, you're not coming on site, it would be useful. Again, somebody with experience of cataloguing, like everything else, the more experience you have, the quicker it would be. You know exactly what fields to put in just to make the catalogue record more robust and searchable. Again, questions we'd have is how would you keep expanding the collection? So obviously we'd be limited here as a physical space. How much do we hold here on site? One of the questions, I suppose, Fiona talked about being a reference library, but could we lend out stuff? Especially if we said, right, it'll be stuff that's kind of easily sourceable here in Ireland or whatever. So you'd make those. That would be something to think about. What to include, what not to include, and then this suitable area and suitable storage in the library. Again, it's that would be a major thing to think about. How would you keep expanding? How would you keep it safe? How would you keep it here? So I think that's the general gist of the recommendations from Mary and ourselves.
Yeah, and there was, I suppose, very similar recommendations from Roberta as well, and from my side was that, can this be a self-sustaining library in a way that members of the IADT student and staff community could nominate materials for the library, and in doing that they are defining the fields. When you nominate a material, you could have a call once or twice a year. When you nominate a material, you have to do it in a very certain way that pre-populates some of those cataloguing issues, some of those sticky bits, that gives you very clear guidance on images, and you have to supply the images that go with the material. But it would also allow for student work to be entered into it, or staff work to be entered into it. And you could have, raw material once machined, material once finished. You could have these great examples, and it could be an opportunity to really integrate some of the things that are made. But more than that, it could also be open to the entire IADT community. It wouldn't just be the making materials for the making students over in the making side of the house. That by situating it centrally in the library and having it as an open resource, we want everyone to be able to encounter more knowledge about things, and materials are very important in that as well. So I think we did a very, very broad scoping exercise. We have a functioning proof of concept, and with that an associated list of sticky points. So we know how to refine this from here on out. It was a really lovely example of a collaborative research project. We worked on it over the summer, and we met with both of our research assistants twice a week, and it really worked. It was a great relationship. We managed to do it online for the most part. Mary and Roberta met a few times, but it was a lovely example of that thing we're always talking about, that inter and transdisciplinary thing that we often talk about, for each student bringing their strengths, really bringing their strengths and their expertise to combine onto something. And yeah, we have great recommendations for how to grow it from here on out, including kind of sort of being able to telescope where the stumbling blocks might be. And yeah, we I think so far so good. What do we have? 4 on the system?
Three.
Yeah, 3
The
actual
paper,
materials.
foam board, and
Oh yeah, that and that. Yeah, that's right. 3 things up, 3 really good proofs of concept, and a huge amount of learning from it.
Fantastic.
Great, thank you.
Can we leave these out maybe at the end? People can come
Yeah,
up and play around a little bit. I'd love that. That's fantastic. That's really fascinating. So next we have, sorry, I'm pushing it along because we're a little bit tight for time.
Sure.
But yes, we have Conor Heagney, who is going to be talking about his work, which
Integrated final case,
Okay.
final year case study.
Well, let me guess. This Conor, I've known Conor for how long? About 10 years now, I think. It's been my pleasure, or more.
More.
I hate to tell you.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
cutting out the years here.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all getting younger today.
That's right. Okay. Yes. Okay. That's exactly it. That's my job and done. We're here to enliven our teaching and learning. So Conor is amazing. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of being a student of his, but he is a remarkably compassionate and caring person in real life. But he brings that compassion into his discipline-specific work that he does with the students, and he has the sexiest thing that he's teaching. Which
Hold
is like
your breath, everyone. Hold your breath. Go on, tell them.
accounting. Is it? Finance.
There you go. That's
That
it.
world.
Tax.
Oh, and tax. this is the guy right here. So how he combines that, it still has students, is amazing. But it has to do with him. He's an amazing guy. So I'll give you the floor for 5 minutes. I'll give you a high sign.
Sure.
And we'll put one.
Rebecca, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So the challenge in this project was how to help final year business students to bring their learning together across different modules to solve complex business problems that they're going to meet in the world outside. Because they are used to dealing within their subject or module and focusing on that and getting through that. But bringing the learning together across a whole lot of different modules is the challenge. So over a number of years, more than 8 years, we've developed this project with a learning loop, and it is a case study. So as it's, what we do is we give students the background of a fictional company, and it's fairly detailed and it's realistic. An international organisation gives us permission to use their information. So it's quite rich and realistic. So the students study the company and the industry for 7 days, and then 9 in the morning they're given 4 problems facing the company, and they have to advise the board of directors by 6 p.m. that evening. So it's a very pressurized situation for the students. They have to have a familiarity with the industry, they have to understand the company, the finances, the management, and what makes the company tick. So it's the most intensive experience that we put them through in final year. And we do that, so they produce a report at the end of the day, and then we follow that up with an interview where 2 lecturers will interview each student on their work. So that broadly is the format of the case study. We do it across all our subjects, so all 7 lecturers are working together on this project, and about 25% of the award year will rest on this project. So it's their biggest single piece of work. So in terms of the experience and the feedback that we get on the student side, the students like this. It suits, they see it as more authentic than a lot of the work we do in accounting and financing. And also they get to display skills and abilities that maybe wouldn't shine so clearly in a traditional assessment. They get to go very deep into a particular situation. So the feedback from students tends to be very good. They would like more ongoing support and feedback, and we do our best on that, but that is honestly a challenge. The administrative side of this, so if I go over then to the staff side, the lecturers, it works well, and we've kept it, it kind of goes from year to year, and the team regards it as a very important part of the programme. And it very much feeds into our learning outcomes for our programme, so it's crucial. The challenges would be that we're fortunate in that we have 7 people who are willing to work together. Because what you're effectively doing in this kind of case study is you're letting 6 other people mark your final year assessment to a significant extent. So not every team might find that easy, but we've developed a working relationship within the team that allows us to do that. And also, I suppose one of the biggest learning points for students, and indeed for us as lecturers, is that we have 7 people sitting on a board of directors, 7 lecturers, and in our meetings with students and in our assessment of the work, the lecturers will contradict one another. And this is something that is very unusual for students. And like in the world of tax and finance, you say this is the answer. But in the real world of business, the 2 biggest points would be that you can have contradicting views. So the students have to assess the 7 lecturers and try and get as many of them on side as possible. So that's the That's it. 5 minutes.
Oh,
Hey! Thank you. Thank you.
thank you, my gosh, that was amazing. That was great.
I
Thank you
suppose
so much.
the thing I would add to that, aside from the fact that Mandel's program work and keeping the admin side of that going, which is it really keeps it alive. The other really valuable thing about it is it really mirrors the kind of potential graduate, if you're going for a graduate internship, it mirrors the kind of process that you're going to be put through. So in terms of preparing final year students for possibilities that they're going to encounter very quickly after college, it's very timely. And I think that's a huge strength of it from,
It is.
certainly from where I sit. I think we can really say we're helping them, we're preparing them in a very real way for what they might be ahead of them.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was really interesting. And
Did you notice how diplomatic he was about making it work?
Yes.
Teamwork. Teamwork.
It makes the dream work.
Teamwork.
You like that one? You can take it. I got it from someone else. So I was wondering if we could get Fiona, because you're just deft as heck. Elaine, would you like to come up?
Yeah, sure.
And so we'll get you sorted.
I'm
But
actually going to take this off if that's okay.
Oh, please,
Is that
God.
all right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So it's just so weird just seeing half of people's faces for me. But I know it's something we have to do.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good.
But let me quickly introduce Dr. Elaine Sisson, and she happens to be married. Sorry, I have to talk about your husband. To one of my
This is
favorite.
exactly what we're talking about in this Wikipedia project.
Oh, is
yeah,
it?
defining women through their relationships with men.
Oh,
but there
okay.
you
I'm
go.
not Faux pas number 50.
It's all right. it's
No.
all right.
He's an amazing actor, so you may have seen him on stage and screen. So I won't say any more than that. But it was through him that I met this beautiful woman, and it's been a pleasure knowing you. Not that I'm going anywhere, nor are you. Having said that, I don't know what's with me today. It's a definite
Friday giggle.
Friday
Yeah,
feeling. It's a Friday giggle.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
Elaine heads the CFA, which is the Creative Futures Academy here in IDT. She's a senior lecturer. She has worked across design for stage and screen in its first iteration, and animation and all sorts of, she's all over fact, we'll put it that way.
Just being all over the place.
Yeah. So it's a great pleasure that she's going to be talking about this
Thank
project.
You, Rebecca.
Pleasure.
Thank you. So this grew out of a design for stage and screen project, so that's why it's still there rather than a CFA project. So what this is basically a research project. Now she's going to see if she can work this. Why is this not working? Rebecca.
There it is. Get it again. Get it again.
There we go. So what it is was a 6-week research project designed for stage and screen. And some of the things that have come up again and again when you're teaching is how do you teach somebody to research effectively? Okay. So the first place everybody goes is Google or Wikipedia, which can be okay, but it does mean that people generate the same kinds of information. And also with Wikipedia, they're not always 100% sure. They're not clear that the provenance of Wikipedia can be a little bit dodgy. Okay, so I decided to think about creating Wikipedia entries ourselves to show them what that was about. So in order to do that, the questions that sort of spurred me to think about it is thinking about what I wanted students to know at the end of it. These are second years. What's a primary source? What's a secondary source? What's an archive? Who writes history? Who owns it, etc. And these are some of the questions that kind of drove my design of this module. So my own interest is in theatre and costume design as a historian. So I have been quite interested in the work of Anne Butler Yeats, who was the daughter of William Butler Yeats, the niece of Jack Butler Yeats and Lolly and Lily Yeats. So we went on, what I wanted to do was to actually think about the place of Anne Yeats in the historical record. So one of the things that was clear to me, so I have to say, when you're teaching, a lot of the work you do is behind the scenes and invisible to make it seem that it's simple to students when they come along it. So I feel like it's a bit like Hansel and Gretel, you're leaving the crumbs. So all the work is there, so you're kind of anticipating what they might find, and when they find it, that's their own discovery. So one of the things I was interested in was Anne Yeats. She was a painter, costume designer, illustrator, etc. But she was also a theatre designer. She was the main theatre designer for the Abbey Theatre during the 1930s. And in her Wikipedia entry, it basically said at the time, Anne Yates was the daughter of, the sister of, the mother of, blah, blah, blah. And then also the terrible line, she never married, the end, okay? So we went on, students saw this, are absolutely outraged when they read that. So I said, okay, let's try and work to change this historical record. So in order to do that is to think about, okay, if you're going to find out about Anne Yates, how do you find that out? You can't go on Google because she's not there. So in fact, what I had done, again, I had done a little bit of work beforehand during the summer. And so the Anne Yates archive is in the National Gallery of Ireland. So what I wanted them to think about was, you know, actually taking ownership of some of this research and uploading. The idea was, the project was, to update the Wikipedia entry for Anne Yates, okay? So what we did that so in terms of laying the groundwork, I actually created a lot of the database myself so that I could check against it. When they came up with the information, I was checking, thinking, okay, that's right. I visited the National Gallery and I met Andrea Lydon, who's the curator there of the Yates archive. And I met her 2 or 3 times actually during the summer before I ran this project to actually kind of scope out the range of the project, the expectations, what the students would be able to have access to, what would be useful, etc. And she was really, really helpful because they're really interested in having people coming in and looking at their archives. So all of Anne Yates' stuff is in a back room somewhere. And then I also talked to Rebecca O'Neill, who I would thoroughly recommend for getting into any classroom. So she runs Wikimedia in Ireland, and she is actually really interesting on digital citizenship and correcting the record. And one of the reasons I met her is because I attended an upload day in the National Gallery where she was teaching us how to upload information about women who are not well there's more entries on railways and trains than there are on women artists, for example, okay? So the other thing that I would sort of say is I aligned this to an area of my own research that it meant that the push and the pull was interesting for me, a bit like, you know, the Fionas, you know, you have to align it yourself, otherwise you don't have the kind of graph for it. So just very briefly, the brief was that I said, you're a design consultant, you have to create this exhibition and you have to provide the background. So this is what we want the information on this. Okay, so the allies, as I said, were the archivists in the National Gallery and Rebecca O'Neill. She came in to talk to us about really interesting stuff about digital citizenship, about knowledge, about responsibility, ethics, all those kind of things. And then we went into the National Gallery and Andrea and Mary Claire brilliantly laid open the whole library with all the stuff that they brought out, and they taught the students how to put on the gloves, to handle the material, to really kind of interact with the actual stuff. And they did a lot of work in terms of making available a range of stuff, so models, costume drawings, sketches, etc. And some of these you can see here. So then what we did was the assessment and learning outcomes. For me, the learning for me was really about soft learning in lots of ways. So the research skills, what they produced, I mean, to be honest with you, I could have produced it quicker and more in depth. But what I wanted them to do is to kind of understand the function and purpose of an archive and the function and purpose of research and kind of primary research. So what we did was we had the actual assessment day was an upload day. So we had Rebecca came in, taught us all, put us all on as users, and then we uploaded it, and it's there. If you Google Anne Yates now, anything that's there, and they created links to other things that they found, etc. So I also built in a level of peer learning. So what I did was I put them into small groups and gave them actual pre-identified areas which I knew were rich, and then they presented those to each other. So we had a really good 360 view of all the research at the end. And then I asked them to do a self-assessment and a peer assessment. The peer assessment is anonymous, self-assessment is anonymous. You can kind of tell what groups people are working in. Just so that I have performers for those, just to kind of reflect on what they were doing, what they learned. And so for me, the learning was skill and competency based. For them, it was something else. So some of the stuff that kind of came out of it was really interesting. So these are some of the student responses from the self-assessment. And it taught me a lot, actually, about, what you expect and what you think people know. So these are responses that came back through the self-assessment. I wasn't sure where to start. So you get this brief, you get this assessment, but what do you do? What do you actually do next? So that's a big curve. I'm not sure what we were being asked to do. The group work particularly, they didn't delegate properly, so people replicated research, and that was a real learning curve for them. The first thing they did with Anne Yates was to go on Google to try and find out information about her, and they couldn't find it, and going, well, this is the whole point. So all of a sudden, they're having to cross-check against other references. So I taught them how to use the British Newspaper Archive, the Irish Times Archive, and other newspaper archives, the Irish Playography, places where these information is kind of secreted. They're used to going to one place and finding all the information there. So suddenly they're looking at newspaper reports and finding out the names of plays, and then going to another place and finding that out and cross-checking. And they found that actually quite exciting. They thought they were stupid because they couldn't find what they were looking for, and then they realised that it wasn't actually there. So they had to fill in those gaps, and that was a big thing. They had to assemble that themselves. And Yates, according to them, has terrible handwriting. She doesn't have terrible handwriting. But they found it really hard to read her sketchbooks, etc. And then they felt that it was very time consuming. And so one of the things that I gave them time in class to do this work with me in the room, and they didn't use me properly at all. And I said nothing. I just thought, okay, I want you to reflect on this. So it did actually come back. So the good bits, this is what they really liked. So finally, when they figured out how to delegate, they realised that they could really kind of amass, critical mass. Researching real stuff about a real person, they really liked that. Knowing that they, and I love this, knowing that we were allowed to go into the National Gallery Archive and Library was a big thing for them. And they were kind of overwhelmed at the kind of resources, the generous resources there. Seeing the amount of work that Anne Yates produced over her lifetime, now as she's a Yates, it's all there in the archive. If she hadn't been a Yates, it probably wouldn't be all there. They were very impressed by that, and it actually made them think about their own, documenting their own practice, because they thought, oh, she left all this stuff behind. She's kept all this stuff, she's documented, she's labelled it, and it made them think practitioners for their own posterity. Making Anne Yates' entry better and contributing to the history of Irish theatre design was really important for them. They felt that it was actually active. They actually contributed to the body of knowledge, which they absolutely did. And then gaining confidence about their ability to research and trusting their instinct and trusting that if they're cross-checking against something, if it's not out there and they put it out there, then that's good, that's fine, if they can kind of sketch that. So what I learned as a tutor, this kind of my own reflection, I didn't know this group before I worked with them. They're quite a small group. I think it would have been better for me if I had known them better, because then you know the dynamics, you know what groups to put together, you know where the difficulties are, who's strong, who's weak, etc. That would have helped, I think. I think that I would recommend, if you run this, to run it with the group that you already know. I felt as well that I assumed a level of research skills before going into the archives, like desk skills, like getting onto the Irish Playography website or newspaper archives. They found that a bit overwhelming. When they were taught it, but it took a lot more time than I thought. I kind of thought we'd do that and then we'd get in here. And that was quite interesting as well. And I thought that actually a pre-session on, particularly on online research, would have built their competency and their confidence. They didn't realise that research is like detective work. So then they felt that when they were running into dead ends, that they weren't looking in the right place, as opposed to kind of going in the back door and finding out stuff the other way around. And then when they found that, they really got excited by the fact that there were gaps that they were able to fill in. So the fact that, for example, in Wikipedia, there were things they're thinking, that's actually incorrect. They were amazed that they could then go in and kind of change a date or whatever on that. I think the context, so this is something that also I learned, because again, students can be they can respond very much a case to do this thing, and they look for that thing. And then I kind of saying, they came back with this really interesting information about Anne Yates was an assistant to a very famous theatre designer, the Abbey, Tanya Masevich, and had loads of stuff about her time in Dublin. But they said, oh, well, that's not part of the assessment. And I was saying, okay, I should have let you think that you can build context and you can build kind of other things. And then I felt very much they didn't understand that I'm also a resource, that your tutor is a resource, and I let them find that out the hard way. And I thought that, active supervision is teaching. Sometimes we think unless we're kind of giving out information or whatever, that we're not teaching, but it is. Being there and guiding them is really important. And that's one of the big learning that they learned, is to kind of go, why didn't we just ask Elaine that thing? And I'm sitting there going, okay, ask me. So, you know, that I didn't trip them up that way, but I let them find out kind of a little bit the hard way. So this is just the upload day when we kind of uploaded to Wikipedia, and just a final self-reflection. It made the project more interesting. It was more than just writing an essay. It gave the research more of a purpose, which for me made it more engaging. And that to me was the huge learning. So some of the other learning that came out of it for me was that I went ahead and researched this, because this happened before COVID, and it's just been published in a peer-reviewed journal. So now we have an actual physical, behind-the-scenes rediscovering the theatre designs of Anne Yeats, in which the National Forum and IDT and my Design for Stage and students are mentioned in that. But also we were able to use some of the money to digitise some of those images. And so we couldn't upload those to Wikipedia for intellectual property reasons, but they are now on the database in the National Library, and I was able to use them copyright for my research, etc. So generally speaking, I think overall it was a project that, although it's about theatre design here, it could be really kind of, it could be used for any kind of anything. If you're particularly we're talking about creative practice, Irish costume designers or animators or model makers or whatever, and just to kind of create that record. So that's my project.
Thank you. That's fantastic. That was really fantastic. Do you know Brendan Collison? He teaches in film. He does a similar sort of thing with the film guys. You should link with him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have all the kind of framework for running it, you know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Hannah Barton. Hannah Barton is one of the lecturers on cyber psychology as well in applied psychology, and she's an avid animal lover. I happen to know this for a fact. I have 2 of her kittens that she found, and I rehomed
Animal
them.
rescues, yeah.
Yeah, she's big into the rescues. But she's also, I mean, you kind of, Cleona's more organizational psychology. Social, yeah.
Social
And she does a great project, the Altruism Project, which you might talk to her about with her third years at another time. But today we're talking about ethics.
Yes.
And yeah, so did you do this project
Yeah.
as solo run? Okay, great.
No, it's okay. I wrote the project. Probably some background to where the project came from.
Yeah, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But she's amazing. Thank you.
Basically, as you may know, the cyber psychology course has been running for over 10 years, and basically is one of the first people, myself and Grania and Marion Palmer, and Andrew Power, I have to say, were involved in setting it up. And one of the first things one of the greatest strengths about the cyber psychology masters was that we get people from complete diverse backgrounds. Okay, psychology degree was not a requirement, so it's a great course in that we have so many diverse projects and people. The issue though is the core of the course is very much psychology based, and how things are done in psychology, and because of that there's a very strong ethical background in psychology, and it's partly because of my own area, which is social psychology. Social psychology is responsible for some of the most interesting yet disturbing experiments that were carried on people. We got Milgram, we got the Jonestown studies, we've got a whole lot of different types of studies that were carried out, and ethics was developed to rein in some of the stuff that was going on. Okay, so we have guidelines from APA, from British Psychological Society, and also from PSI. Okay, so very much our practice now is driven through ethics, and the students, it is driven into them from day one that they have to adhere to ethics for any type of research, and they cannot gather any type of data without getting ethical approval. So it's okay. So one of the issues we had when we were doing cyber psychology, though, is you had people coming in from completely different backgrounds. We had journalists, we had tech people, we had visual artists, we had everybody. And yet they didn't come with that background training and that background awareness of ethics. So when they wanted to do all sorts of wonderful, interesting projects, and we had to rein them in, and we had to give them the issue of consent forms, and it was a bit of an education for them. Okay. And that's where this project, we realized very early on that there was a gap, okay, that there should have been, or there could have been, a need for a resource where they could just go to, or could be have done some reading and be more aware of the ethics within the different disciplines. Okay. Oh, can you have me? Sorry, can you check it up? Oh, okay. Great. So basically, this is where the background of the study came from. Okay. So what we tried to do was produce an interactive kind of toolkit which would be open to both students and staff, okay? And it would be not solely focused on one discipline, it would be across all disciplines. Very ambitious. And I have to say Blackboard is partly responsible. When I was designing this in my head, and it was only brought to delivery through the great participation of both Dr. Emma Matthias, Liam and Peter, our student, who did actually create this. I had it very well laid out how I wanted it to look, okay, but it's so ambitious, okay, and then the actual project is literally halfway through at the moment, okay. So basically the idea was that we would start off primarily, there would be a number of different modules, and the modules, it would be almost like a self-directed learning course, okay, for both staff and for students. And therefore they would get information about an overall arching theme of what ethics was. Then they would move on to whatever module that they needed to know about, whether it was business. And the idea was the information and the content that would fuel these different individual module slots would come from best practices within each of the discipline areas. Okay? So we started off first with psychology, because that was our base and that is the one we knew best. Okay? So we started, the modules were research with human participants, online research, which was coming through from the area of cyber psychology. We wanted to, when we get some content of the visual arts, business, the workplace environment, and also how the different link into the ethical approval process for running projects in each one of the disciplinaries. Okay, so this is actually how it kind of looked. So the importance was providing the content, okay, but also made it interesting, interactive. Okay. Now at the time, the project was highly ambitious. Okay, highly ambitious. And at the moment, it's actually, there is a module, two of the modules are pretty much there, but it's not live. Okay, but that's one of the issues that we have to run into, is about hosting this and for this to go live. Okay, so Peter taught himself Adobe, and he started building it in Adobe XD. Okay, and the idea was ultimately when we finish it, that it's going to be up online like a Blackboard module as a resource for any student or any staff in all of the IoT sector. Okay, that is if we can get it running up and live. Okay, so at the moment it's made up of content in terms of quick definitions, interactive studies, okay, and video links. Now one of the interactive studies we threw in there was the trolley dilemma. I don't know if you're familiar with that. We threw that in and asking students to partake, or individuals or participants to do it, and then they get some feedback. Okay, so there's test yourself knowledge, okay, videos, links to videos, also links into the current updated practices in the various bodies. In psychology's case, it's PSI, etc. Okay, so where are we at the moment? Okay, this is actually there, it's built in Adobe, it looks fabulous. Okay, it's not live yet, because we have to put more research in, and we have to hopefully get it funded for part 2, because it was the scope of this was way beyond what I thought for a single LEP project, quite bluntly. And we don't want to leave it sitting there because it's halfway there. So these are what we have. We have MCQs, reflective activities, okay. We have got the human participant psychology section pretty much finished, okay. Contents, everything's in there. The online is pretty much finished. We're starting, the next stage part was to go to the other experts in the areas, interview business and visual arts. That's where we're going to be heading for next, if we can get this funding for part 2. User testing on the current online module and on the current human participants module is also what we have to do as well. Okay, so that is at the moment where it is. We actually have it half built. What I learned from teamwork, I'm not a technology, I didn't build, so Peter was fabulous. We got 2 students. Peter built the actual, learned Adobe and built it. And then Liam, Dr. Liam Chandler, who's now doing some work in the psychology department, was great because he also went on and started gathering the content for us as well. And between Emma and myself, we project managed. I still think, and I see the value in this as a tool. Okay, we're now looking as well about hosting it and maybe moving, if we get this finished, moving it in towards Blackboarders or to actually host it. Because the idea is to open this up if we can get it live.
Yeah.
For that we need more support because it's
Yeah,
so ambitious.
I mean, this is one I think that we need to look at in terms
Oh,
of
thank
how
you.
we can. No,
Oh, thank
how
you.
we can
Don't-
move on.